Driving into walls breaks Mario Kart 64, whether it's boosting off a wall to cheat a lap, getting on top of a wall to trick Lackey 2, or straight up driving through them. Almost every shortcut involves hitting a wall. However, there are two walls that are special because they allow players to perform shortcuts that are perfect in every sense of the word, and today we'll be looking at these tracks, so let's jump into Luigi Raceway and Toad's Turnpike. Luigi's Raceway has a history of shortcuts dating back to May 1997, with the first being a boosted jump over the wall after the tunnel. It was discovered by Gios Oriamuno, and the way it works is by boosting over the off-road section as you ignore the speed reduction while boosting. This allows you to hit the wall at high speed and bounce off of it, but getting over it is a bit more complicated. When you crash into a wall, the game adds a rebounding force to keep you from passing through it, but if you jump at the same time this force is added, the force is applied to the jump, which allows you to get more height than normal. This makes getting over the wall a piece of cake, and you can see this early record by Alex Penev hitting it on all 3 laps. But you might be wondering, why don't they jump off the gray wall instead of the brick wall? It's closer, so it should save more time, right? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. The steep polygons leading up the wall are marked as tumble surfaces, so as soon as you touch them, your momentum gets killed and you'll fall back to the track. So you might be wondering, how does David Wonn jump up these surfaces in this 2001 record? And the answer is that he doesn't touch the polygons. Discovered by Myles Buckram, the aptly named Myles style found a genius way to get over the wall. If he couldn't jump on the polygons, then he'd avoid the tumble by jumping on the seams between the polygons. The seam between the track polygon and the tumble polygon doesn't have the tumble property, but it does have the upward bounce property, so the first jump, he lands on the seam and presses jump. But there's another problem. This jump doesn't get enough height to clear the wall, and the next seam he can land on is between a tumble polygon and a wall. Neither of these polygons have the upward bounce property, which means the seam jump shouldn't work, but in the video it does. So what's going on? If we look at the physics subframes, we see that if you touch the wall on one subframe, then the tumble section on the next subframe, you can get a bounce jump. Why this happens is complicated and will remain a mystery, and using this strategy, you can see that the fast lap was grinded over the course of 20 years from a 33.04 down to a 25.67. But then, something game-changing happened. The biggest shortcut in all of Mario Kart would get discovered. This video's sponsor, Factor. If you're busy grinding shortcuts in Mario Kart or watching my videos, you don't have a lot of time for meal prep. But Factor has you covered as it lets you do the grocery store skip, food prep skip, and the cook time shortcut, as Factor meals are made ready to go and only take 2 minutes to heat up. Factor also offers a lot of snack options like breakfast, smoothies, juices, and more. So no matter how busy your schedule is, you'll always have something ready on the go. And if you're still hungry for more skips, then do the delivery app skip and let Factor take care of your nutritional needs with meals that are cheaper and chef crafted. One thing Factor doesn't skip is the availability of options, as they have over 35 meals to choose from each week, with options in keto, calorie smart, vegan, vegetarian, and more. Get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders using my link. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code with your phone. And with that, let's get back to the shortcuts in Luigi Raceway. Forrest and Weatherton would be investigating how walls worked, and Forrest realized that a shortcut was possible on this track without leaving the finish line. And Weatherton, being the nice guy that he is, decided to use this shortcut to achieve a record with every character that hadn't been used in one before. The release of this shortcut opened the floodgates, as the record hadn't been lowered in 5 years, and VAJ's 25.67 was lowered by over 25 seconds, first by Weatherton and then a huge number of community members. Which leaves the question, how does it work? There are 2 things we need to understand for this shortcut: the requirements for the game to count a lap, and how walls work. When it comes to completing a lap, there are 4 checks the game makes. The first is that you cross from behind the line to the front of it. You might think you can exploit this by driving behind the line, then back over it, but the second check prohibits this, as the game will turn the finish line off unless you've been at least 1,000 units away from it. The third check the game makes is that you've progressed at least 20 sections away from the finish line. The track is broken into sections that are roughly 1,000 units each, so this check makes sure you've made progress on the lap by tracking your section. The fourth check is about how large the finish line is, as it extends further into the track than just where it appears on screen, which is why you can finish laps by driving outside of it as long as you're within 1,000 units, and that's all there is to know about finish lines. For the lap skip, that's only half the equation, as we still need to investigate what's going on with the wall and how we're able to trick it into thinking we've finished an entire lap. When you hit a wall, a lot of different different things can happen, but here's what the game intended. The hitbox for a wall is situated like this, with more of it hanging over the back than in the front, and the reason for this is how the game calculates your speed when handling collisions. Let's say on one frame you're this far from the wall, and on the next you would be here. If the hitbox only stuck out in the side of the wall you were facing, you would pass through it since the game never sees you as being in its hitbox. This is the reason you can clip from the outside of the calamari desert fence easily, as it only has the small part of the hitbox turned on. And while clipping from the inside to the outside is possible, it's incredibly hard and has only been done twice. So while it is possible to go through walls with enough speed, that's not what's happening on Luigi Raceway. In this case, we want to crash into the wall's hitbox with enough speed that we get on the other side of the wall itself, but still land in the hitbox so we get pushed back into the finish line area. The reason we need this to happen is due to the order of operations physics interactions are calculated, as once the cart moves, the game will then check what part of the track is beneath the cart before looking at hitbox calculations. This means that for the brief period of time we're inside of the wall's hitbox, the game sees us as being in that section of the track, so it updates our section as being very far from the finish line, which satisfies the distance and section checks. It then applies the force to keep us inside of the wall. At this point, we're behind the line with all of the requirements to complete a lap, so as soon as we cross it, it gets awarded. When this strategy was first released, the setup was performed by crashing into the wall and having Lakitu come and get you, and because you were briefly seen as being in the section after the tunnel, that's where he takes you. But this doesn't get us a perfect lap. For that, we need to ignore Lakitu. Lakitu will only come and get you under certain conditions, such as driving into water or touching an out-of-bounds section, and on the other side of this wall, the grass is marked out of bounds. So while the game sees you as being in a faraway section, it also sees you as needing to be rescued, but there's one other condition for Lakitu to appear, and that's input frames. The game runs physics updates at 60 frames per second, but it only accepts button inputs on half of them, with these being called input frames, and the ones in between being called lag frames. Lakitu only functions on input frames, however, and since we're only outside of the wall for a single frame, that means there's a 50-50 chance we'll get lucky enough for the clip to happen on a lag frame, right? Wrong, because with a precise setup, players were able to ensure that the distance they travel will always have them clip through the wall on a lag frame. What they did to set up the perfect lap was drive a lap almost to completion, then set up the precise wall clip. This way, they could complete the lap while executing another lap skip, and with this setup, they were able to quickly lower the record from half a second close to perfection. Before we get to the record chase, there's an interesting piece of Mario Kart history to look at. Ahead of Forest and Weatherton releasing this shortcut, they mentioned what times were possible with it, and seeing no other way of hitting the shortcut other than driving into the wall, Abney figured out how it worked before it was made public. He didn't know about the precise setup to avoid Lakitu, however, so Forest still had the advantage and would be the first to hit it, with his best attempt coming in at .02, less than a frame away from perfection. But Abney was hot on his heels and just a day later would tie Forest, meaning the race was on to see who would hit it first. And just 30 minutes later, this happened.
I won! Yes! Oh my god. We're done. 30 minutes into the stream.
Abney would be the first to get a perfect lap, and over the next few months, 7 more people would tie his time. And that's the end of shortcut fast lap history on Luigi Raceway. Abney's time can't be improved. He'll hold the record, the longest forever. It's sad in a way. For the first time in Mario Kart history, the progression of a track has come to an end. But that's what other tracks are for, and Toad's Turnpike also has a perfect lap skip, so let's dive in. Going back to 1997, we see that this track also had a skip that David Wonn posted about, and this time it was discovered by the man himself. He realized the overlapping section of the track was reachable from above with some setup, but it requires exploiting a mechanic called the Lakitu effect. When Lakitu rescues you, there will be a delay in when he can come and get you if you get stuck again, which allows us to drive further out of bounds. And in this case, it allows us to drive right through the out-of-bounds rail section without getting stuck. However, it was eventually discovered that you didn't have to reach the overlapping section to jump down. You could go out of bounds after the finish line, and for some strange reason, Lakitu would take you to the lower section where you could then finish the lap. This method of shortcut stood for 22 years, with Dan achieving his first shortcut record and the last fast lap record with it, because in 2020, things changed in a major way. There's a value called the section jump that stores the section of the track you're in if you ever move by more than 4 path markers backwards or 7 7 forwards. It can only be assumed that this was designed to stop shortcuts, but due to how it was implemented, it was easily exploitable, and all of the out-of-bounds interactions you see are exploiting the section jump to get the player behind the line with full lap progress. When it was first found, the strategy went through several variations across different versions of the game due to Lakitu's logic being slightly different in the Japan 1.0 version, but they all abuse the same section jump mechanic. That is, until Forrest and Drew figured out that you don't need to do any of this. All you need to do is go out of bounds once. Well, maybe twice. Looking at an overview of Toad's Turnpike, you'll see that there isn't a further section of track next to the finish line, and the track overlap is up ahead, which means there's no possible way to get your kart over a further section of track while at the finish line, right? If Mario Kart skips have taught us anything, it should be that the answer is always no. The grass just beyond the guardrail has a special property. While it is treated as an out-of-bounds surface, it's actually marked as unknown in memory. And when you go above it, the game will read your section jump value and sees that as the section you're in. So if you set your section jump to something far enough away from the finish line that it satisfies the lap requirements, you can then perform the perfect lap skip the same way as on Luigi Raceway. Forrest would be the first person to hit the lap skip this time, and since then, 18 people have joined him in the record singularity, which means the shortcut fast lap for these two tracks have reached the end of their lifespan. As far as challenge goes, these tracks have nothing left to offer. The 3-lap records are a different story, however, as while you can set up for multiple fast lap attempts on Luigi Raceway, this does take time and will never be fully perfect. Toad's Turnpike requires a bit more setup with the section jump, so perfection will elude the 3-lap unless something changes. However, these aren't the only tracks with a perfect record. Yoshi's Valley also has a perfect shortcut that works by completely different mechanics, and fortunately, I've got a video explaining everything about it, so be sure to check it out. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next exciting episode of Abyssoft Z.